Lovely. So Janet, with so much of experience of coaching and coaching the world, I mean, you've been to multiple places. What an experience, incredible experience you bring. Tell me a little bit about your journey. Where did it start from?
So, I had the great privilege to work for a wonderful financial services company called Charles Schwab, and I spent 14 years there. I'd done a little bit of work in the commission based side of financial services while I was in college. Didn't go that route, ended up going to work for Schwab before it was a big company. We were
Mm.
in a little 4-story building on the wrong side of Market Street in San Francisco. And when I left, we had a huge building in San Francisco, 28 stories, and we had 4 regional call centers. We'd set up a London office and we'd set up a Hong Kong office. So I watched a trajectory of tremendous growth.
Mm.
And one of my last assignments there, Chuck had asked us one day, "Do you think it's time? Could we ask our branch offices to move beyond customer service and begin selling?" Which was
Mm.
a kind of a no one shall speak that word. And could we develop them to provide financial planning services? He always believed in the ability to empower the individual to own their own tomorrow, was our slogan at the time. And I got the privilege to redesign the customer experience in every branch office. This was a scale of change
Mm.
that none of us had ever tried to tackle before. And coaching was just beginning to constellate. So I was aware of it in the organization development circles. There were some facilitators who were starting to look at how do we take more of an appreciative inquiry approach to helping people think through creative conversations that were contentious.
Mm.
And besides the fact that it was a huge culture change, it was also an interesting power dynamic because everybody at headquarters thought they knew what the right answer was for the customer experience, only they were too far away. We
Mm.
needed the receptionist at the front door to have a completely different stance when people came in. And they were going to be the best source of helping us understand the baseline,
Mm.
how much change that was going to entail. So we ended up doing a coaching approach, what I would call today team coaching. In fact,
Mm.
I did team coaching when I left Schwab in other companies before I did one on one work. So I
Mm.
was so fascinated by how we could have people with differing points of view be in the room in a constructive way without it becoming positional and me or you, somebody wins, somebody loses, but rather lots of good ideas on the table and then learning synthesis.
Mm.
I always use the word synergy. I know that lots of people don't like that word anymore. It's become old fashioned, I guess. But that's what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
We're weaving. We're weaving out of respect and value for the different perspectives
Mm.
because I'm going to see through my bias, just like you're going to see through your bias. Put
Right.
our biases together, transparent and open.
Mm.
Now we've got something we call innovation.
Mm.
And that's exactly what happened. And you can look at commercials today for Charles Schwab and Company, and you have everyday people who have become financial advisors on staff at Charles Schwab and Company delivering
Mm.
services to customers all over the world. And,
Mm.
that's the genesis of the project I did back in the
Mm.
early 90s and set me on the path to coaching. And
Mm.
really, what does it mean to create a culture where people feel the invitation and
Mm.
then the acknowledgement of their point of view as
Mm.
competence
Mm.
and the autonomy to act on it?
Mm.
This is core motivational theory,
Right.
Ryan and DC from the 70s, right? So
Right.
um, I think coaching has provided an alternative to someone being a deep vertical expert, and it's helping organizations understand how to have every level of the organization think more horizontally and systemically.
Mm. So interesting. I think when coaching was just picking up and you were already working on such a massive project to change the culture. So, what were your learnings from there and what got you into full time coaching from there?
That when we get out of the way, when we create the conditions as a leader and get out of the way and allow the conversation to bloom,
Mm.
not forcing the bloom, but allow it to bloom more organically, more spontaneously, and kind of the simple way we talk about coaching today, asking before telling, listening
Mm.
to learn, right?
Mm.
Not listening to form my response, but listening to learn.
Mm.
Just that fundamental shift in behavior, along with the mindset that everyone
Mm.
already possesses the resourcefulness necessary to
Mm.
rise to the opportunity in front of them. They may
Right.
not yet be skilled in it, but
Mm.
the potential is there if we'll create the conditions as leaders for
Mm.
that conversation to
Mm.
emerge.
Mm.
And this was the big insight for me out of that project. And I went to my boss. I stayed another 2 years, and we got everything into the talent systems and got the call centers all stood up. And I just said, it's been great 14 years. I'm ready to go spread my wings a little, and I'm going to go see if I can repeat history. And in fact, I was, as a solo practitioner, billing 18 days a month. And I was like, this is not sustainable. And so I got some partners, and we started working all over the world. And I've never looked back. So
Mm.
I've been coaching, I've been doing leader education, I've been doing organizational culture consulting. Sometimes I'm doing all, sometimes one of the above.
Mm.
Organizations are seeking, finally, I think, right? It's taken 30 years, but I think they're finally seeking some way for their leadership ranks
Mm.
to recognize adaptability as a key skill set, not
Mm.
just agility,
Mm.
but to recognize that the environment is asking them to loosen their grip on how they've always done it and
Yeah.
experiment with what rises to this new challenge in front of us. And that's a big transformation that a lot of companies are going, uh-oh,
Right.
we have a whole nother generation of leading ahead of us. So
Right.
it's exciting.
True. So I'm now wondering, with all of this experience, if you were to define coaching, a very individual definition with all of that vast experience, and let's
It's
also
it's two words.
two
It's two
word.
words.
Give me those words.
Awaken consciousness.
Awaken
That's what we
conscious.
do.
Wow. Elaborate. Tell me more.
To a client in my individual work with leaders and organizations, which is primarily the work that I do, I am evoking attention on what's right on the edge
Mm.
of a client's awareness. They sense it, they feel it, their gut tells them that something is off, something is not working the way it used to, but they can't quite put their finger on it. And our ability as coaches, well trained coaches, to ask the question that challenges them to look here.
Mm.
What were your assumptions? What
Mm.
is the preference you operate from? What's the habit that had you act in that way that's producing a result you don't like, you
Mm.
don't prefer, you don't find valuable, it's not effective enough? That inquiry process with a client helps them to recognize where they're operating on an autopilot,
Mm.
which, oh, by the way, our bodies prefer,
Mm.
something called the reticular activating system.
Mm.
And in that moment, when they realize, I wasn't paying attention, I trusted the team that had this assignment, I knew it had a bigger risk profile, I did not give them enough of my attention to spot when they stepped over the change that was necessary until we were at implementation. I had a big client who just, put $35 million at risk because the team had missed something super important. And
Mm.
not only did they stop the implementation, but they've pulled the project. It was
Mm.
easier to swallow the sunk cost than it was to risk
Mm.
what implementation might have brought.
Mm.
And in that moment, that leader understood they were too distant from it. Too
Mm.
many things going on, too much blind faith in the delegation, and not enough. Wait a minute. We need to have a little more reciprocity
Mm.
in our exchanges as we're developing this initiative.
Mm.
Habit says, and it worked before, it'll work again. I'm going to
Mm.
turn my attention to something else.
Mm.
When we can awaken the ability to be more deliberate,
Mm.
we prevent weakened decision making and the loss of productivity, let alone the opportunity cost of not having implemented that initiative.
Mm.
It's big dollars.
Wow.
Not on
Yeah.
the P&L necessarily all the time, but big dollars.
Right. Right. And I like what you said about attention. Yeah, and I think attention to what's at the edge. We just don't expand our view and don't see multiple things. And I think it's really about expanding that view.
Yes, yes. Open the camera lens to wide
Yeah,
angle. Yeah.
I like that metaphor. Yeah, yeah. And you've written a book now, but let's move into your book. And you wrote a book on from tension to transformation. I think
Mhm.
before I get there, I think there's a lot of tension in the organizations you must have observed in the leaderships. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the background, your experiences around what did you observe that made you to write the book?
So I think it's a lifelong fascination with what makes people successful. And I'm not so interested in the production of results, which is one translation of the word performance. Did we hit our metrics? Did we grow? Did we get market share? Has the organization scaled itself well? Those are all important. Don't get me wrong. What I was more interested in is internally for each leader. How aware are they of how they create sustaining growth and performance over time? What's the mindset necessary for them? And how do they make the choices they make? So, mindset for me influences three important things: how we show up, how we interact with people, and how we make decisions. Pretty important.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the things that contribute to that: frame of reference. So what is the worldview through the lens, like the prescription glasses I look at the world? My attitude, my thoughts, my beliefs, which are constructions, my habits, my preferences. That when we are on autopilot, which our bodies kind of like, we miss things, right? That's that moment when we have blinders on and we don't have a wide angle lens.
Right.
Well, to turn off the autopilot requires being more curious.
True.
I need to ask other people how they see things. I need to process and receive it, even if it makes me uncomfortable. It's like, wow, I've never thought about that idea before. Or, my gosh, how are they translating the strategy to mean that? That's not what we meant at all, which is often the complaint I hear from top level executives. Like, how are they translating it this way? That's not what I'm intending. So, out of that, I began to see that the word generative, if you look it up in the dictionary, it's always talking about producing, but there's three more capacities that go with it. Learning. I found that successful, high performing, sustaining high performing leaders are consummate learners. They're never satisfied, that they fully see what's actually occurring. And I don't mean academic learning. Yes, that's great. If you can read 6 books a week, good for you that you've got time to do that and absorb it and apply it. Most of us don't. And what I'm much more interested in is, how did they let the reading impact them? How did it influence the way they allow themselves to receive people who are different from them? Because that's learning. I'm
Right.
learning how another is experiencing our company, our products, our customers, our vendors, and so on. Learning is key. What learning does is move it from curiosity to wonder. I think wonder is a more advanced state. And in wonder, we have ideas emerge. Now, I want you to hear, learning requires discomfort. That's
Yeah.
tension, right? Tension is, oh, I'm not in the flow anymore. Something's disrupted my attention. Let me pause for a moment and figure out, how come it's disruptive? What is different about it? What belief in me or assumption or bias or preference or habit in me does that idea cause me to feel disrupted or uncomfortable? That's the seed of innovation. Most people just push it aside. Oh, that's just crazy Janet. I used to get that. I'm a bit of a renegade. That's just crazy Janet, right? And then 4 years later, somebody would be coming around going, that idea you had, I think we should now do it. Okay. So I've had this personal experience of creating moments of tension and people needing to push it down, and until they were ready. I think when we awaken attention to the disruption and we can stay there just a little bit longer, ask another question to say, what wants to happen now? What do we want to cause to happen now? We're on the way to innovation, and that's originating new thinking.
Mm. Mm.
That's the second new one.
Mm.
And then the third, it should be quite obvious at this point, is create. The actual making it tangible. You can't just be an idea factory. You have to
Mm.
be able to translate the ideas into something practical. And
Mm.
that's pilots and experimentation and beta testing and putting something out in the market for free to see how people respond to it before
Mm.
you put production lines in place, right?
Right.
Think about unmanned taxis.
Mm.
They've been free on the streets of San Francisco for 3 years.
Mm.
Doesn't cost you anything to get in one. They're just starting to monetize it.
Mm.
That's an example of creativity on innovation that's ahead of its time, that's paving the way that when they're ready to produce,
Mm.
they will have worked all the kinks out. So, produce, learn, originate, create. Those are the four capacities of being generative.
Mm.
And it's the moment of tension that creates the transformation. And I saw this in leader after leader after leader after leader. And there were some common tensions. And the book really is telling the story of about 16 leaders. Everybody will find something they will have had a direct experience with in the
Mm.
book.
Mm.
And I'm talking about these are not polarities and
Mm.
they are not paradoxes. They are two truths happening at the same time. Control and agility is
Mm.
one of them. So you want a bit of control when you're doing something risky.
Mm.
You want a bit of agility when you're trying to get throughput,
Right.
productivity, right? They coexist. Every situation calls for a slightly different mix of control and agility. But if you're over identified with one or the other and
Mm.
insistent that it has to be one way or the other, dualistically thinking, you will
Mm.
have missed the opportunity that's in front of you.
Right.
And somebody's going to get excluded. So if I'm a control leader, I'm going to exclude the people who are good with agility.
Right. Right. Right.
You
Missed
see?
opportunities,
So,
right?
absolutely.
And Janet, you spoke about wonder is the advanced version of curiosity.
Yeah.
I'm still thinking on that, and I want to hear more from you on that.
So I began to notice in my own coaching that I don't know, maybe I was getting a little bored with the standard curiosity building on the energy shifts I was seeing in my clients. And I started to hear inside of myself, I wonder, what is it in this client's background, experience, bias that is preventing them from trusting this new idea that's happening right in that moment in the session? I
Mm.
could hear myself saying, I wonder.
Mm.
And I realized that I was noticing my own judgment, that this person was so much more capable than they were giving themselves the self trust to pursue something. They were
Mm.
doubting their own competence. All right. So I noticed my judgment. I'd pause a little longer. I'd let them talk a little longer. And then I would say,
Mm.
I wonder what you're protecting in yourself
Mm.
when you don't trust this new idea you've just declared. And it had a profound impact. I had leaders who would just sit still for 2 or 3 minutes, a dead
Mm.
silence.
Mm.
And I knew I was onto something. So I couldn't answer that question. To me, that's an unconditional curiosity. There's
Yeah.
no way I know the answer to that question. Only they do. And it only lives inside of them. And I went, it was the word wonder that
Mm.
made the difference. I wonder. And then I thought about my own life when I'm aspiring to a new strategy for the business. That's a state of wonder for me.
Mm.
And what am I doing? I'm sowing the seeds of transformation.
Mm.
So wonder is beyond curiosity. Now, wonder might lead to more curiosity. Like, so
Mm.
now I've got this big vision I want to go pursue.
Mm.
I better write some questions down and figure out who I need to talk to and make sure that I collect enough information to make a sound decision. So wonder is part of the process, and it is about really trusting. There's a deeper knowing. We may
Mm.
not have the outer evidence for it yet, but there is a deeper knowing
Mm.
of a possibility.
Mm.
Now let's go see if we can support this new original thinking.
Mm. So,
That's a transformative process.
insightful, Janet. And let's go back to Tension to Transformation book. So we spoke about generative and so what is generative wholeness for a leader?
So we've spoken about the generative piece.
Yeah.
Wholeness is really talking about kind of the first idea that emerged for me, and this was around 2010. I started asking this question: what is it about coaching that works? What is it that
Mm,
makes it stand apart from
mm,
mentoring,
mm,
stand apart from good supervisory leadership practice, stand apart from consulting or training and education followed by expertise of some kind?
mm,
Um, and to me, of course, this is in our code of ethics, it's the peer to peer quality
mm,
of a coaching partnership.
mm,
The coach is bringing a refined communicating and relating skill set and
mm,
the objectivity
mm.
that is inherent in being outside of the system.
Right.
And the leader, of course, is bringing all of their biases and experience and wisdom and expertise and a hunger for
Mm,
something they can sense that is different, bigger, and better, but they
mm,
can't quite articulate it yet. So those two peers in a thought-provoking conversation can be generative together.
mm,
But here's the key: are they exercising the power of choice? Are they
mm,
accepting responsibility that they can choose different than the system that they're operating in?
mm,
Because it is the moment when tension produces transformation.
mm,
This is sovereignty. I think everybody internally has a voice. You might call it your mastermind, your captain, your general, your um, inner authority. Right? There's something you listen to interiorly,
mm,
and when we consistently listen interiorly,
mm,
we have a privilege that carries a responsibility to exercise it. I can choose how I relate to the conditions of my life.
mm,
Well, guess what? That's the road to the authentic self.
mm,
Once you accept responsibility and you're not only driven by outer expectation of how you perform,
mm,
now you're realizing, hey, hang on a second. I have values and principles. I have ways of understanding the world that are unique to
mm,
me, and I'm going to accept responsibility for choosing to use it. What
mm,
is that? That's potential,
mm,
untapped potential. What do we do in coaching? We tap that potential so that it gets actualized.
mm,
That's the authentic self starting to express itself more fully.
mm,
So, wholeness is the freedom to express personally and professionally from the authentic self in
mm,
a sovereign way.
mm.
Generative wholeness,
Generative.
bringing those capacities through the authentic self to everything we do.
So why is it not really a concept in every organization? Because I think, how do you think we can adapt to that?
Well, I hope I live long enough to see it.
Mm,
And what I hear from leaders, so I have some unicorn leaders who are adopting it.
mm,
The way they behave and model
mm,
has leaders making transformation on their team and
mm,
learning to make transformation on their teams.
mm,
But it's pretty countercultural what I'm talking about, Harris.
mm,
If you've grown up with 20, 30, 40 years of experience doing predictable, controllable, consistent performance of results, what I just talked about feels very scary.
yeah.
But here's the thing: you cannot grow an organization without scaling, and you
Yeah.
cannot scaling without releasing authority. You have
Mm,
to grant authority, and
yeah.
then you need to stay in relationship to
Mm,
see that people are stepping up, rising to the challenge, accepting responsibility, and fulfilling it.
mm,
That's a whole bunch of change.
mm, mm,
That
mm,
is a whole bunch of shift in mindset,
mm,
and it's a new behavior that knows how to ask before telling
mm,
and listen to learn. I
mm,
want to learn what this person in front of me understands about the business. I
mm,
want to learn what this person projects in their understanding of the system
mm,
of our business. And I want to learn if they understand the risk profile of the initiative that they're working on.
mm,
Now, that means I got to sit in the discomfort that I know the answer. This
mm,
is going to take way too much time. But
mm,
here's the key:
mm,
it takes far less time and it scales. If I know I now have a person in front of me who can think like I do, I can turn them loose on a much bigger project than I
Right.
normally would have done in the absence of learning about them.
Hmm. Hmm.
This is what they miss.
Hmm.
And why I think it's a bit of a revolution to
Hmm.
think in generative wholeness terms,
Hmm.
and why I wrote the book.
Yeah. So everyone should read the book, therefore. So,
Everybody
so
tells
pull
me
back
it's
for
highlighted in dog ears. It's got.
yeah. So also about something you mentioned, pull back for perspectives. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah. So that's really about stepping back, viewing the perspectives again, and then reshifting, shifting and reshifting and creating and recreating.
yes.
Tell me a little bit about what is pull back for perspective.
So a couple of months ago, I did a master class I called Leadership Pause, and it's been getting a lot of play out on the YouTube channel, which is interesting to me. I love reading comments when people listen to something that I've said, and I think that our techno enabled zero geography world is causing us to forget that we have a cycle in the human body. Just like we drink water and eat food, we
Hmm.
have to restore calories
Hmm.
because we burn them like crazy.
Hmm.
And the more engaged and active you are, the more you're burning.
Hmm.
Only we've gotten to this place where we think we don't have to do that.
Hmm.
So we keep ratcheting up pace, we keep ratcheting up scope, we keep ignoring the early signs of burnout, and now we churn the workforce.
Hmm.
Particularly, lots of companies right now are staging layoffs because of what's going on in the economics across all countries. It's not unique to America. And we are, as a result, laying more and more stress.
Hmm.
Well, that puts everybody up in their sympathetic system. What happens then? We don't have access to everything in our prefrontal cortex, right?
Hmm.
We're not operating with all our batteries.
Hmm.
So that's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Hmm.
I had a very wise CFO tell me early in my professional life, you cannot cost cut your way to growth. It doesn't work. You have to invest, right? You have to invest food and water into a human body.
Right.
You have to invest, pause,
Hmm.
take time to breathe.
Hmm.
That's the first step of pulling back for perspective.
Hmm.
But a more transformation oriented version of this is you've been looking at the trends and you notice that a certain product line that's been tried and true, it's the one that keeps the light bill paid, is been dropping. You're
Hmm.
losing market share and you're losing therefore revenue. Uh-oh, that's not a good trend.
Hmm.
You could just assume the market is changing, the consumer wants something else. So now let's ramp up innovation for a new product and not look at it carefully enough, not pull back enough to say, that's one right answer.
Hmm.
So, first is a belief system that can be more than one truth happening at the same time. There's a lot of that going on right now. And begin to ask the questions,
Hmm.
right? So, I think a lot of pulling back for perspective is taking the pause moment.
Hmm.
And I really mean a moment. It could be 2 minutes, 5 minutes, pull your chair back, take a deep breath. What
Hmm.
am I missing here?
Hmm.
What question am I not asking? What
Hmm.
habit am I attached to? What preference made us go down this road? What
Hmm.
assumptions have I not checked the evidence on?
Hmm.
How is a bias operating some cultural overlay in our company that doesn't match the shift we've made in market? These are important business questions,
Hmm.
but they require the mindset and the courage to pull back for perspective, to
Yeah.
ask a question that makes you a little uncomfortable.
Hmm.
And we're not training new managers and leaders in this. And this is why I think coaching has a rosy future. That's not an AI question to be asking.
True, and I think pull back also very uncomfortable for a lot of people. I think the leadership is in question then.
Mm.
The
Mm.
pause and the moment of silence, I think, is not accepted very well.
So I had a wonderful client in who was an Egyptian working in Saudi,
Mhm.
and he had three really big IT teams and a huge project that they were working on, high government visibility. And he said the same thing to me that you just said. I can't pull back. They'll
Hmm.
think that looks weak.
Hmm.
But as he began to talk about what was happening in the team and how some of his directs were behaving and the ripple effect it was creating and having to clean up a bunch of messes and pull the plug on a few things before they could go to market because they missed some very important aspects of the implementation, he started to see, if I don't pull back, they're going to keep making mistakes.
Right.
I have to pull back and spend more time with them and ensure that they're seeing the full picture. They were all seeing their verticals, but they weren't seeing the connection points and therefore missed the friction points when they were working on the new initiative. So we began to see that pulling back actually was what he needed to do to scale. And he did that. It took him 90 days, but he completely rewired every one-on-one. He completely rewired his team meetings. He changed the way project status was reported. He put agreements in place around escalation points. You can keep going on this to this moment, and then you need to escalate. We all need to pull back for perspective together to examine, have we covered all the bases? So as he changed his rhythm, his team changed his rhythm, and they delivered the first project under time and under budget in a decade. So it's real, right? But it's a mindset shift, to your point.
And hence it can take longer, but it's not difficult. It's not impossible, right? It could be difficult
It
for a few
doesn't
people.
take longer. Yeah, wait a second. So challenge your assumption here. If I don't pull back for perspective and the team is charging ahead and they hit a roadblock they cannot implement because they missed a step and the project is delayed for 90 days, what is the opportunity cost and the hard cost of those people now having to be deployed on troubleshooting, not attending to the implementation and moving on to a new project? That's expensive. If we were slowing down a little bit, I'm not talking about days and weeks and months of pause. I'm talking about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, might be a morning huddle on an initiative where everybody's doing a bit of that check-in and then moving forward. And they go right into implementation without losing those 90 days.
Right.
So you got to really pay attention to what assumptions are you making about time. It's a construct, for gosh sakes. It's how we use time that matters.
Right. Right. And this is very constructive to pull back. It's not destructive. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so what are the challenges now you face when you're working with the organizations, the leaders, come up with and share with you today?
It's the one you just asked, in which I answer the way I just did. Or I'll ask a series of questions. What's the evidence that you look at that says that pausing takes too much time? And they never can answer me. Like, okay, are you happy with the results your teams are producing? No. What is it that you think the gap is? What would be different in the outcomes if that gap was bridged? So what am I doing? I'm coaching them to pull back for perspective.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Not just the immediate pain they're having, but to spend a little time looking at how healthy is this system. And I will tell you, 9 times out of 10, that conversation reveals a decision made 6 months, 9 months, 12 months ago that is still bouncing around in the system unimplemented because it doesn't fit with how they've always done it. And nobody's paying attention going, wait a minute, we didn't change how we'd always done it to absorb the policy change.
Yeah.
So now I've got conflict and loss of productivity and poor engagement and at least a destructive leadership. Boom, boom, boom. Right. Whole cascading.
Yeah.
But that level of inquiry by us as practitioners, we give the opportunity for a leader to pull back for perspective and realize how much choice they have in creating the conditions necessary for change. And, that's good change leadership and change management theory. But I think we overcomplicate it and we don't allow leaders the opportunity to think.
Right.
And to have it not be shameful if on their watch something didn't go well.
Yeah.
It's just what is. It
Yeah.
didn't go well.
Hmm.
Okay, let's learn from it.
Hmm.
Hear
Hmm.
it? And in the learning, allow wonder to have a new idea come
Right. And
forward.
also that requires a lot
So,
of, go ahead.
no, no, go ahead.
Yeah. So I was saying it's also about psychological safety for leaders, right?
Yeah.
And tell me how, in your experience, psychological safety is. I think it's on a one hand for leaders, it's their job to create one for everybody else, but for themselves as well to feel for themselves.
Yes.
Yeah. So
I just had a really interesting exchange with Amy Edmondson on LinkedIn.
okay.
She did this really wonderful
Hmm.
video short on green team and red team.
Hmm.
And are you the kind of leader that only wants to hear, green light on your plans,
Hmm.
and you don't make room for talking about where things are on red light?
Hmm.
And she set it up as an either or.
Hmm.
I wrote and said, what if we made that an and?
Hmm.
What if leaders could make the space
Hmm.
for their directs to always bring the and?
Hmm.
That they're looking at the entire system,
Hmm.
that they don't reject the things that are on red, but they look at those as opportunities.
Hmm.
Opportunities for learning, opportunities for ideation, opportunities for revealing patterns that we weren't looking at before. Start with the green so the team feels the confidence necessary by the leader in their competence.
Hmm.
Acknowledge what behaviors, what methods, what processes made it possible for you to win on
Hmm.
those initiatives. How might those things we just inventoried be
Hmm.
useful to talking about how do we move the red ones forward?
Yeah.
Not send them out of the room to go fix your problems,
Hmm. Hmm.
but instead to create a learning environment. That's
Hmm.
the first stage of psychological safety. Then
Right.
it's being available to listen to both
Hmm.
with respect for the competence of the team. You work so dang hard to
Hmm.
recruit, select, train, onboard, and get productive.
Right. 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 So it's really about psychological safety that really can do wonders. And Janet, so there's something about archetype at work. I was reading
Mm-hmm.
on the book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I want to hear
This is
more on
a
that.
this is a really interesting innovation.
Mm.
A couple
Mm.
of gentlemen who have
Mm.
very famous fathers. Richard Olivier is in fact the son of Laurence Olivier,
Mm.
and he spent about 30 years of his career adapting Shakespeare into leadership development workshops.
Okay.
Lawrence Hillman
Mm.
is the son of Dr. James Hillman, who created archetypal depth psychology and then archetypal
Yeah.
psychology,
Mm.
furthering the work of Dr. Carl Jung.
Mm.
He also happens to be 40 years an astrologer, an amazing astrologer, actually. These two guys get together and they start wondering,
Mm.
what if we could create an embodied way
Mm.
to recognize that the patterns of the human condition are in every single person energetically? Energy,
Mm.
not personality, not psychosis, not even actually in the realm of habit, preference, assumption, bias.
Mm.
They're living in us. We are embodied archetypes, every single human being.
Mm. Mm.
Well, that was a pretty radical concept, but they both had a lot of experience in the application to leadership.
Mm.
So they've built a system called Archetypes at Work.
Mm.
And it works in all of the 5 realms that all leaders have to deal with: creativity, relationships, order, change. I'm leaving one out, but it doesn't matter.
Mm.
Anyway, every aspect of leading. And then they've brought forward the common patterns in human society from all time, right? It doesn't matter what century we look at.
Mm.
And providing a way for leaders to self inventory.
Mm.
This isn't about a third rubric that says
Mm.
this is how you should be.
Mm.
It's not in the typology arena at all.
Mm.
It is a wholeness instrument that says, as I answer these 100 questions, I'm thinking to myself, pulling back for perspective,
Mm.
how am I operating right now? How am I showing up in my leadership? How am I showing up with my team? How am I showing up with customers?
Mm.
What impact am I producing? What influence am I having? And the data that comes out the other side helps them to see there are 3 main stage actors, my go-tos. They're my habit, preference, bias space. And if I overuse them they likely backfire. And I pretty quickly can see that.
Hmm.
And then some supporting actors, and then some minor, like I only go to them in certain situations. And then there's usually two that are way off stage,
Hmm.
which means I'm underusing them. They're aspects of the human condition that I'm not accessing.
Hmm.
They often hold the key to balancing the overuse, under and overuse, right? Having some opportunity to balance energetically. And they often are the source of my dissatisfaction.
Hmm.
The thing I most long for is the thing I'm not using.
Hmm.
Because I'm caught in my habit and preference space,
Right.
right? I need to flip the autopilot switch
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
So I love the instrument because it helps people see a wholeness picture
Hmm.
without any pathology to it.
Hmm. Hmm.
It also is about energy, the energy I want to inhabit. Now the same behaviors get delivered differently.
Hmm.
So I love launching new innovation projects. But if
Hmm.
I do it only out of my sovereign inspiration and I'm not being curious with my team to see where their creativity might shape and modify my great idea, I'm going to disenfranchise them. They're just going to sit on the bench and let
Hmm.
me go
Hmm.
do the innovation.
Hmm.
I need to nurture. I
Hmm.
need to do a little nurturing of that creativity there, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's still my innovation behavior, but
Hmm.
I deliver it with a different energy. I love this instrument,
Hmm.
and it aligns very beautifully to helping people access more of who they are,
Hmm.
come back home to themselves, and access it fluidly
Hmm.
in a way that is appropriate to the context that's in front of them.
Hmm.
And all the leaders that I'm using the archetypal preference report with just say, wow,
Hmm.
this made my personal change process so much easier.
Hmm. So,
Again,
yeah.
simple.
Yeah. And again, pull back per perspectives. I think just a broader view of, yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you also introduce the idea of deliberate judgment.
What about that caught your attention, Harris?
So I think we all are busy making so many judgments every time. Deliberate could be, I know what judgment am I making? Am I aware of that? And I want to hear from you. I mean, how is that idea that you articulated so well? How did that come about for you?
So I look different than other people with a birthmark on my face. I
Okay.
have had the direct experience of people being judgmental
Hmm.
because of my difference, not speaking to it, but their behaviors
Hmm.
exclude.
Hmm.
So I've been exploring this idea of judgment and judgmental for all of my life. I did a TEDx talk on it actually,
Hmm.
as a way to start to form my ideas a little bit more, because I could see this in leaders that I was coaching, that they felt judged by their leadership. They felt judged by their team, misunderstood. You know, the classic, I got 360 feedback. How could they think that about me?
Hmm.
It's not what's going on inside of me, right? Classic. And so I started to think about, if we demonize judgment, and we've done this, we've said non judgment, zero judgment, suspend judgment, be non judgmental.
Hmm.
But wait, we might be throwing out the baby with the bathwater here, because the baby is discernment.
Hmm.
How do we navigate our world? We navigate our world through the contrasts.
Hmm.
This feels more aligned to me, more respectful of my values.
Hmm.
This doesn't.
Hmm.
That's a judgment,
Right.
right? This is a risky
Hmm.
project. This one is a low risk project.
Hmm.
We have this horrible phrase in business, let's go after the low hanging fruit. Like, what the heck? If I'm going to deploy people to the low hanging fruit, are we sowing any seeds to get more fruit in the next season? Right? We have to be able to do long, intermediate, and short term things all at the same time,
Right.
which means I have to have some deliberateness,
Hmm.
deliberate, conscious, intentional choice making.
Hmm.
Now, I would say I would add to that wholeheartedness.
Hmm.
I don't believe being a human has a destination. We're always in a fluid, transformative state
Hmm.
as humans
Hmm.
in the environment that is also in a fluid, transformative state. So it's up to us to say, what choice am I making?
Right.
And from where within me is that choice based?
Hmm.
Inner authority. And then what is the impact and influence on the system, on the customer, on the community, on the geography I live in, on the planet that is our ecosystem, that kind of thinking will lead us to what is now being called regenerative. And you cannot be regenerative if you can't think about the whole system, if you can't roll your idea forward to all of its ripple effects. That is very sophisticated.
Right.
We're not even good at generative yet, for goodness sake. So, yeah, deliberate. We need to be more deliberate, and that requires pause, pull back for perspective, and ask ourselves the question, how will this idea roll forward? Who are all the people that it's going to impact? What unintended consequence could occur? What might we incorporate to our idea that would mitigate any negative impact of that? This is a government rolls out a policy and all of the sudden realizes we missed something over here, and quick, a new bill gets passed, or they amend the bill that they're about to pass, right? Because they're thinking about those unintended consequences. That's an example of deliberate judgment. Doesn't mean you're always going to do it right, but if we don't allow ourselves to judge, to discern, to identify the perceptual contrasts, we're going to make mistakes that might not be as recoverable. And we do it emotionally with people when we dismiss them out of our biases. Now that's being judgmental, as if it is the only truth, as opposed to discerning, what is it about this person that makes me uncomfortable? Let me go find out who they are. There's this great program here in America called Braver Angels. Lots of coaches have started working with them, and they are essentially facilitating a conversation between two people who have very oppositional perspectives on life in America right now. Political, yes, but not always. Sometimes it can be faith or education or professional practice. Could be lots of things that they just have very opposing points of view. And they take them through a process of getting to know each other. And as the relationship builds and the trust between them and the compassionate understanding of each other's very different backgrounds, and yet arriving at, that's the source of my passion from my point of view. I can see both of us have passion for our points of view, and that's okay. They can both exist at the same time. Healing begins in that conversation. And that's what we're talking about.
Right. So it's really a blend of emotional and rational approach to judging how we judge, right? It's combining the two.
Yes.
Interesting.
Got it.
Yeah.
I'm glad you like it. It's a provocative idea.
Yeah, it is. It is definitely. Yeah. Janet, tell me if one wants to reach out to you for learning more about your book or about the generative wholeness. How could one reach out to you?
So our YouTube channel is wonderful. I just put out a 20-minute piece on generative wholeness. So if anybody got a little spark today and wants a little more depth, it's there, as well as we regularly put out free resources there for leaders and teams and coaches. And Janet Harvey on LinkedIn. I post regularly, loved comments, love having conversation. People can DM me there. And of course, email is janet.harvey@invitechange.com.
Great. And maybe we can put the link of your social media and YouTube on the description of our.
That would be fabulous.
Janet, this has been a really meaningful podcast for myself personally.
Thank you.
Full of learning. And I'm sure our listeners will also find the same. Thank you for your time today, Janet. And looking